You wake up. Another day begins. You brush your teeth. You eat breakfast. You go to work. You come home. You sleep. And tomorrow, you'll do it again. But in the quiet moments between these rituals, a question creeps in. A question that has haunted humanity for centuries. Why? Why are we here? What does any of this mean? Some people never ask. They move through life on autopilot, following the script handed to them by society, by parents, by tradition. But others, they cannot ignore it. The question becomes unbearable. It pulls them into an abyss of uncertainty. This is where existentialism begins. Not in a classroom, not in an ivory tower, but in the raw, terrifying confrontation with existence itself. Welcome to the story of a philosophical revolution, a movement that stripped away comforting lies and forced humanity to face an uncomfortable truth, that we are alone, that we are free, and that we are responsible. This is the history of existentialism. Denmark, 1844. A young man sits in his study, pen trembling in his hand. His name is Søren Kierkegaard. He is writing furiously, filling page after page with ideas that will not let him rest. Kierkegaard is tormented, not by poverty, not by illness, but by something far more unsettling, the feeling that his entire society is living a lie. Around him, people claim to be Christians. They attend church, they recite prayers, they follow rituals passed down through generations. But Kierkegaard sees through it. He sees that they are merely performing, going through the motions. Their faith is comfortable, safe. It requires nothing of them, and this enrages him, because to Kierkegaard, true faith is not comfortable. It is terrifying. It demands everything. It requires a leap into the unknown, without certainty, without guarantee. He writes about Abraham, the biblical figure commanded by God to sacrifice his son Isaac. Most people see this as a story about obedience, but Kierkegaard sees something else. He sees a man standing on the edge of an abyss, a man forced to make an impossible choice, a man who cannot rely on reason or ethics or society to tell him what to do. Abraham must choose alone. This is the birth of existential thinking, the realization that in the most important moments of our lives, we stand alone. No universal moral law can guide us. No religious authority can decide for us. We must choose, and in that choice we define ourselves. Kierkegaard calls this subjective truth, the idea that truth is not just abstract and universal, but personal and lived. You cannot understand what it means to have faith by reading about it in a book. You must experience it. You must live it. And in living it, you must face anxiety. The anxiety that comes from being responsible for your own choices. The anxiety that comes from freedom. But Kierkegaard is ahead of his time. His ideas are published under pseudonyms. They are ignored by mainstream philosophy. He dies in 1855, largely unknown. His questions, however, do not die with him. They wait, buried, growing stronger, until the world is ready to hear them. The year is 1882. Friedrich Nietzsche publishes a book called The Gay Science. In it, he writes perhaps the most famous philosophical proclamation of the modern age. God is dead. But Nietzsche is not celebrating. He is warning. For centuries, European civilization has been built on Christian values. God provided meaning, moral absolutes, a sense of cosmic order. Even if people did not truly believe, they lived within a framework that God's existence made possible. Now Nietzsche observes, that framework is collapsing. Science is advancing. Reason is eroding faith. People no longer truly believe in God, but they have not yet realized what this means. They think they can simply stop believing in God and carry on with the same moral values, the same sense of meaning, the same purpose. Nietzsche knows this is impossible. If God is dead, then everything that depended on God dies with him. Morality, meaning, truth. These are not objective features of the universe. They were human creations justified by belief in the divine. Without God, humanity is left with nothing, a void, a meaningless universe that does not care whether we exist or not. Nietzsche calls this nihilism, the realization that there is no inherent meaning in existence. Most people cannot handle this realization. They try to fill the void with substitutes. political ideologies, scientific progress, material comfort, anything to avoid facing the truth. But Nietzsche refuses to look away. He stares into the abyss, and he asks a radical question: what if we created our own meaning, not by pretending God still exists, not by clinging to old values, but by embracing our freedom to create values from nothing? He calls this the will to power. Not power over others, but power over oneself. The power to overcome nihilism, to become what he calls the Übermensch, the person who creates their own meaning in a meaningless world. Nietzsche writes with passion and fury. His words are poetic, prophetic, often misunderstood. He suffers a mental breakdown in 1889 and spends his final years in silence. But his ideas spread like wildfire. They reach philosophers, artists, and writers across Europe. They set the stage for what comes next, a world war, and in its aftermath, a generation desperate for answers. The First World War ends in 1918. 10 million soldiers are dead. Empires have collapsed. The old certainties, God, country, honor, progress, lie shattered in the mud of the Western Front. A generation of young men returns home. They have seen unspeakable horror. They have watched their friends die for causes that now seem hollow. They have been told they fought for civilization, for justice, for the future. But they know the truth. They fought for nothing. They died for nothing. This is the soil in which existentialism takes root. In Germany, a philosopher named Martin Heidegger begins teaching at the University of Freiburg. He is brilliant, charismatic, and deeply disturbed by what he sees around him. People, he observes, are living inauthentically. They have lost themselves in the crowd. They follow trends. They repeat what others say. They avoid thinking about what truly matters. Heidegger asks the most fundamental question of all: what does it mean to be? Not what beings are, but what being itself is. This sounds abstract, but Heidegger brings it down to earth. He talks about everyday life, about how we lose ourselves in busy work and idle chatter, how we avoid confronting our own existence. He introduces a term that becomes central to existentialism: being toward death. We are the only creatures who know we will die. This knowledge defines us. It hangs over every moment of our lives. Most people run from this knowledge. They distract themselves. They pretend death is something that happens to others, not to them. But Heidegger insists we must face it. Only by confronting our mortality can we live authentically. Only by recognizing that our time is finite can we make choices that truly matter. Death is not just an event at the end of life. It is the background against which life gains meaning. Heidegger's philosophy is dense, difficult, sometimes impenetrable, but it captures something essential: the anxiety of modern existence, the search for authenticity in a world that encourages conformity. His work becomes a foundation for existentialism. But Heidegger himself remains a controversial figure. His involvement with the Nazi Party will haunt his legacy forever. The ideas, however, spread beyond him. They cross borders, they reach Paris, and there they explode. The year is 1943. Paris is occupied by Nazi Germany. Food is scarce, freedom is gone. The city that once sparkled with art and philosophy now lives under the shadow of oppression. But in a cafe in the Latin Quarter, something is happening. A group of intellectuals gathers. They smoke, they drink. They talk for hours about freedom, authenticity, and existence. At the center of this group is Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre is short, cross-eyed, and brilliant. He has studied Heidegger. He has absorbed Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, but he is developing something new, a philosophy that speaks directly to the human condition. In 1943, he publishes Being and Nothingness. It is over 700 pages long, dense with technical philosophy. But at its core is a simple, radical idea: existence precedes essence. This three-word phrase becomes the slogan of existentialism. What does it mean? Traditional philosophy assumed that human nature is fixed, that we have an essence, a purpose, or design built into us. Whether by God or by biology or by society, we are already defined before we make any choices. Sartre rejects this completely. We exist first. We are thrown into the world without a predefined nature, and only through our choices do we create our essence. We are not born with a purpose, we create it through living. This is both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because we are radically free. No force, divine, social, or natural, determines who we must be. We can become anything. Terrifying because we are radically responsible. We cannot blame God. We cannot blame society. We cannot blame our genes. Every choice we make defines us, and we make those choices alone. Sartre goes further. He says that we are condemned to be free. We cannot escape freedom even if we want to. Even choosing not to choose is a choice. And this freedom brings anguish, because we bear the weight of our decisions without any guarantee that we are making the right ones. Sartre's philosophy spreads through Paris like a fever. It resonates with people living under occupation, people whose certainties have been destroyed, people forced to make impossible moral choices in a world gone mad. Do you collaborate? Do you resist? Do you stay silent? These are not abstract questions. They are life and death decisions, and existentialism offers a framework for thinking about them. You are free. You are responsible. There are no excuses. At Sartre's side is Simone de Beauvoir. History often remembers her as Sartre's companion, his partner, his muse. This is a mistake. De Beauvoir is a philosopher in her own right, and in 1949 she publishes a book that changes everything, The Second Sex. De Beauvoir takes existentialism and applies it to the question of gender. She asks, "What is a woman?" And she answers, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." This is existentialism applied with surgical precision. Just as Sartre said existence precedes essence, de Beauvoir says that femininity is not a biological destiny. It is constructed, imposed, performed. Women are taught from birth to be passive, to be objects, to define themselves in relation to men. Society treats men as subjects, autonomous, free, self-defining, but women are treated as the other, as less than fully human. De Beauvoir traces this through history, through mythology, through literature. She shows how every culture has conspired to deny women their freedom, to deny them their existence as full human beings. But existentialism offers a way out. If existence precedes essence, then women can reject the roles imposed on them. They can choose. They can define themselves. This is not easy. Society punishes women who step out of line. But the possibility exists. The freedom is there. The second sex becomes foundational to feminist philosophy. It influences generations of thinkers and activists. It proves that existentialism is not just abstract theory. It has real-world consequences. It can liberate. But liberation, as Sartre and de Beauvoir both know, comes with a price. The price of anxiety, of uncertainty, of standing alone. Algeria, 1942. A young writer named Albert Camus sits in his apartment in Oran. Outside, the world is at war. Inside, he is working on a novel, The Stranger. The book tells the story of Meursault, a man who kills someone and cannot explain why. A man who feels nothing at his mother's funeral. A man who seems indifferent to his own fate. The book is unsettling, disturbing. It forces readers to confront uncomfortable questions about meaning and morality. Camus becomes associated with existentialism. He is friends with Sartre. They publish together. They debate together. But Camus rejects the label. He is not an existentialist, he insists. He is something else. In 1942, he publishes The Myth of Sisyphus. It begins with the most famous line in existential literature. There is only one really serious philosophical question, and that is suicide. Camus is confronting absurdism, the idea that we crave meaning in a universe that offers none. We ask questions that have no answers. We search for purpose in a world without purpose. This is the absurd, the fundamental disconnect between human need and cosmic indifference. Most people, Camus says, avoid facing the absurd. They fill their lives with distractions, or they commit what he calls philosophical suicide. They leap into faith or ideology to escape the absurdity. But Camus offers a third way. Embrace the absurd. Accept that life has no inherent meaning, and live anyway. He uses the myth of Sisyphus, the Greek king condemned to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity. Every time he reaches the top, the boulder rolls back down. This is absurd, pointless, without meaning. But Camus ends his essay with a powerful declaration. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Why? Because Sisyphus has accepted his fate. He has stopped looking for cosmic meaning. He finds meaning in the struggle itself, in the act of pushing the boulder. This is rebellion, not against the gods, but against nihilism, against despair. We create our own meaning through action, through solidarity, through living fully in the face of absurdity. Camus and Sartre eventually break over politics. Sartre embraces communism. Camus rejects all totalitarian ideologies. They argue bitterly and publicly, but both are trying to answer the same question. How do we live in a world without God? How do we find meaning in meaninglessness? Their answers differ, but the question remains. Existentialism spreads beyond philosophy. It influences literature, Dostoevsky's tormented characters, Kafka's alienated protagonists, Beckett's absurd dialogues. It influences art, expressionism, surrealism, works that depict anxiety, isolation, alienation. It influences psychology. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, develops logotherapy, a form of therapy based on finding meaning in suffering. Rollo May brings existentialism to American psychology, arguing that anxiety is not just a symptom to be cured. It is part of being human, part of being free. But existentialism also faces criticism. Religious thinkers accuse it of nihilism, of stripping life of transcendence. Marxists accuse it of being too individualistic, of ignoring material conditions and class struggle. Some accuse it of being depressing, gloomy, obsessed with death and despair. These criticisms miss something essential. Existentialism is not pessimistic. It is realistic. It does not deny that life is difficult, that freedom is burdened, that we face our mortality alone, but it insists that we have the power to create meaning despite all this, that authenticity is possible, that we can choose who we become. This is not despair. This is hope. Radical, difficult hope. The heyday of existentialism, the cafes of Paris in the 1940s and 50s, has passed. Sartre died in 1980. Camus died in 1960. The movement as a cohesive philosophical school faded, but the questions remain. In fact, they have become more urgent. We live in an age of unprecedented freedom. We can choose our careers, our identities, our lifestyles. We are no longer bound by tradition or rigid social roles, but this freedom brings anxiety. The anxiety Kierkegaard described, the anxiety Sartre analyzed. Who am I? What should I do? What matters? Social media amplifies this. We are constantly comparing ourselves to others, performing versions of ourselves for an invisible audience, living inauthentically. We distract ourselves with endless content. We avoid silence. We avoid confronting the fundamental questions. This is what Heidegger warned against. The danger of losing ourselves in the crowd, in the they, in conformity. Mental health crises surge. Rates of anxiety and depression climb. People report feeling disconnected, lonely, purposeless. These are existential crises, and the answers existentialism offers are still relevant. You are free. This freedom is terrifying, but it is also your power. You can choose, not just small choices, but the fundamental choice of who you will be. You are responsible, not to a cosmic plan, not to what others expect, but to yourself. Meaning is not given. It is created through action, through commitment, through living authentically. This is not easy. Existentialism offers no comfort, no simple answers, no certainty, but it offers something more valuable: truth. Existentialism forces us to confront something we would rather avoid. That existence is fragile, that meaning is constructed, not discovered, that we are alone in a universe that does not care. This is uncomfortable, terrifying even, but perhaps that is exactly what we need. In a world full of easy answers and comforting lies, existentialism demands that we face reality, that we stop hiding behind ideologies, traditions, or distractions. It asks us to take responsibility, not just for our individual choices, but for the world we create together. Sartre said we are condemned to be free, but perhaps we are also blessed to be free, because only in freedom can we create something meaningful. Only in accepting our mortality can we truly live. Only in confronting the absurd can we rebel against despair. The history of existentialism is not just the history of a philosophical movement. It is the history of humanity asking the most important question: what does it mean to be human? And discovering that the answer is not written in the stars. It is not handed down from heaven. It is written by us, in every choice we make, in every act of creation, in every moment we choose to live authentically. Kierkegaard took his leap of faith. Nietzsche embraced the death of God. Heidegger confronted being toward death. Sartre declared our radical freedom. Camus imagined Sisyphus happy. Each offered a response to the terrifying gift of existence. But the question remains open, always open, because each of us must answer it for ourselves. So here is the question this history leaves you with. If you truly accept that you are free, that you create your own meaning, that you are responsible for who you become, what will you choose? And more importantly, are you living that choice right now?